Hey creeps, I'm Taylor and this is TGI Crime Day. Hello and welcome to the fourth and final part of Urban Legends from each state. This series has been so fun and I hope that you've also enjoyed it. I've definitely found a couple of really great legends and spooky topics that I want to dive deeper into for future episodes and kind of do a deep dive on to sprinkle in throughout the true crime content to kind of give us a break, a little palate cleanser from the usual content that makes me really sad and really bummed out, whereas we get to do something like this and it's kind of fun and it mixes it up a little bit. The other three parts of this series will be linked in the show notes or the description box, so you can check those out. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to talk to you about a very cool and important fundraiser that I'm doing for a really good cause. Some of you may remember my episode about the unsolved murder of Jared Bridegan, and if you missed it, that will also be linked. You can get the full story and kind of hear everything about Jared's case. To sum it up, Jared Bridegan was driving home with his 2-year-old daughter, Bexley, and Jared was lured out of his car and shot to death in front of Bexley, who was then alone in the car for a few minutes until someone else passed by and found her. And once police were called, Bexley was taken to a police station until they could identify Jared and get in touch with his family. So for a few hours, Bexley was at the police station basically alone. She had obviously officers there, and they did their best to take care of her, but they didn't have things that she needed like a sippy cup or diapers or anything like that. And this whole event was so traumatic for Jared's family that it inspired his incredible wife Kirsten to create something that's really amazing that was so needed for police stations where kids are sometimes in police custody. So Kirsten founded the Bridegan Foundation, which is now distributing the Bexley box to police stations. The Bridegan Foundation website says, quote, "We provide Bexley boxes, a refillable kit, to police stations to better equip them for interacting with traumatized children. Each Bexley box contains essentials and comforting items to calm children in times of crisis." I just think that the Bexley box is so beautiful and such a smart idea that Kirsten came up with as a way to create light after such a horrific and tragic event. And as some of you know, I have a small jewelry business called Ginger Next Door, and I decided to create a necklace that was inspired by the Bexley box, and 100% of the profits will go directly to the Bridegan Foundation. I don't know if my camera will focus on this necklace, so I will put some pictures in here as well. The Bexley necklace is an 18-karat gold dipped chain that can be worn between 13 and 16 inches, so you can wear it like a choker or you can layer it with other necklaces. And I made these specifically with the large lobster claw clasps, so they're easier to handle and put on yourself. The charm on the Bexley necklace is a sunflower, and I chose this because as I have followed Jared's case, his family and his loved ones, especially his wife Kirsten, have found ways to spread light and find positivity in the hardest, most horrendous thing that anyone can go through. And the saying goes that sunflowers always turn to face the light, and that is exactly what the Bridegan family has done throughout all of this. So if you would like to get your own Bexley necklace, you can get these on my website. I will have them linked. I have a limited supply. Once they're gone, they're gone. So make sure you grab one if you want one. There will also be a link so you can donate directly to the Bridegan Foundation if you don't want to get a necklace, but you still want to be part of this amazing cause. Jared's murder is still unsolved, and his family is still fighting every single day to get justice for him. So make sure you go follow the Justice for Jared Instagram and keep sharing his story. Again, 100% of the profits of this necklace will go to the Bridegan Foundation, or you can donate directly on their website. All of the links you need will be in the description box. Thank you for taking a moment to listen to this fundraiser, and thank you in advance for your support. Let's get into today's episode. Our first story today comes from Oklahoma. Oklahoma is home to a famous hex house and yet another crybaby bridge, but today let's explore Oklahoma's very own Bermuda Triangle, aka the Shaman's Portal in Beaver Dunes Park. The dunes are made up of 300 acres of sand, perfect for riding ATVs and exploring and just doing all of those outdoorsy things that I don't personally do. There are artifacts and journals dating back to the 1500s when Spanish conquistador Francisco Vázquez de Coronado was exploring America. Supposedly, he and his caravan were traveling through New Mexico, Texas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, and Kansas in search of the lost city of gold. When Coronado met a group of Native Americans, they tried their best to warn him against traveling through the area of the dunes because of the strange things that they'd seen happen. But of course, Coronado insisted that he was this great explorer and he did not need to heed their advice. While making their way across the 300 acres, the caravan suddenly saw a bright flash of green light and 3 of their men just vanished, never to be seen again. Since then, there have been many more disappearances in the dunes and more reports of mysterious green lights. This area has been given the nickname the Shaman's Portal, and whether it's a portal to another dimension, the site of a UFO crash, as some people have suggested, or giant sinkholes swallowing people into the earth, people are warned to avoid the dunes after dusk. Up next, we are going to one of the sister states of Utah, Idaho. Did you know that Idaho has its very own sea monster? Well, technically, I guess she's a lake monster. Anyway, I had no idea, and now I just love her. Railroad workers in the 1920s first spotted what they thought was a huge tree floating along Big Payette Lake in McCall, Idaho. But suddenly they saw movement as a creature at least 35 feet long slithered its way out of the water. The creature was described as brownish green and traveled like a serpent. The creature was spotted again by multiple witnesses in 1944, making national news. Again described as at least 35 feet long with a dinosaur-like head, pronounced jaw, and shell-like skin. Since then, people have tried to get a glimpse of the monster, and she is now a beloved part of McCall's community. In the 40s and 50s, people traveled from all over to try to get a picture of the creature or to even capture her. I believe there was a bounty out at one point that someone wanted to buy her for a circus. Luckily, no one ever got their hands on her, and she has remained a beloved mystery. For a long time, her nickname was Slimy Slim because of a newspaper article that was published about her, but then there was a contest to decide on a name for her, and she is now known as Charlie, and she's just an icon. I love it. The town of McCall has a winter festival every year with a big parade, and Charlie is a huge part of this tradition. People make ice sculptures of her and parade floats. If you have been to this and you have pictures of these floats and things, please send them to me. I want to know it all. Charlie shows up in different businesses, including a restaurant with the Charlie Burger, which I don't love because it sounds like you're eating her and we shouldn't do that. But she is one of those legends that has lived on for a long time, and I don't think she's going anywhere anytime soon. People are always trying to spot her, and she is a beloved part of this town's history. It's so great. If you have a first-hand account of seeing Charlie, or if you have been to the Charlie Festival, I want to know. Tell me everything. Up next, we are going to Kansas. According to legend, a boarded-up well sits in the middle of Alma Cemetery in Kansas and has a very dark history. The story goes that a grumpy old farmer owned a big piece of land in the 1800s and refused to sell it to the newly founded city of Alma, who wanted to use the land for their cemetery. Was he grumpy, or did he just not want to sell land that was rightfully his? City officials showed up once again to try to convince him to sell his land, but when they got there, they couldn't find him anywhere on the property. It seemed that he hadn't been around for a while based on what they saw, and when they approached the well, there was a terrible smell coming from it. Apparently, they were all glad to be rid of this grumpy old farmer, so no one bothered to investigate further, and they decided to just board up the well and build a cemetery around it without his permission and without looking into where he went. This is why urban legends are so fun, because they don't worry about gaps in stories or logic. They just say, board up the well and move on. This well has been nicknamed the Devil's Chair, and if you are brave enough to decide to sit on it, it will be the last thing you ever do. Anyone who sits on the Devil's Chair in Alma Cemetery has never been seen again. Up next is my home state, Utah. My fellow Utah babes will probably not be surprised that I chose to talk about Skinwalker Ranch for Utah's spooky story. This ranch is located near Ballard, Utah, and is home to stories about everything from monsters to UFOs, portals to other dimensions, and plenty of other supernatural, terrifying stories. Some Native American groups in the area believe it is home to evil creatures called skinwalkers, which is where the ranch got its name. To be honest, I kind of don't know why we gave it that nickname because it has very little to do with skinwalkers on this ranch. It's mainly UFO sightings and other paranormal activity. Anyways, there's a lot to be said about the ranch because it is one of the most scientifically studied paranormal hotspots on the planet. There's a lot of secrecy around the ranch, and the New York Times reported that the ranch was part of a huge study conducted by the Pentagon from 2008 to 2013. There are so many stories that surround this ranch that it's hard to choose just a couple to talk about today, so if you would like a full deep dive all about Skinwalker Ranch, please let me know because I am down to do a whole episode about it. And you know what? Just assume it's going to happen at some point because now I'm fascinated. So in the 90s, the ranch was owned by the Sherman family, and they only lived there for about 2 years because they had so many strange and terrifying experiences. For example, the Shermans saw strange blue orbs that would float around their property and in the woods. Their dogs would bark and try to chase after these orbs, leading to an incident where the dogs chased the orbs into the woods. Mr. Sherman was too terrified to follow them, and after trying to call them back with no luck, eventually the dogs stopped barking and stopped yelping, and then they were never seen again. Allegedly, there were burnt patches of grass where the dogs were last seen. They claimed that there were also many other farm animals found mutilated with organs removed and other strange injuries, but there was never any blood around these animals. Inside of their home, the Shermans heard strange voices speaking languages that didn't sound like anything they'd ever heard before, and items around their house would go missing and turn up in strange places, or they would walk out of a room only to come back and find that all the cabinets were opened. There was also one experience, I think, where Mrs. Sherman got home with a bunch of groceries. She put the groceries away, left the room, and came back, and all of the groceries were back in the bags. Don't love that. I hate putting away groceries. They also had experiences with crop circles on this ranch. I am telling you, this is just the tip of the paranormal iceberg, and the stories over the last few decades are fascinating. The ranch has changed ownership multiple times and has been kept under lock and key for a really long time, but the current owner, Brandon Fugel, allowed camera crews to go in and make a whole documentary about it and to get lots of footage for the History Channel. So, like I said, if you want a full TGI Crime Day style summary of all of the things, I will absolutely go down that Investigoogle rabbit hole for you guys and for myself. Next up, one of my favorite places, Florida. Oddly enough, we have 2 devil's chairs in this episode, and apparently devil's chairs are just as common as crybaby bridges and witches' graves, and I'm here for it. The small unincorporated community of Cassadaga, Florida is known for 2 things. 1, the large number of psychics and mediums that live there, giving it the nickname the psychic capital of the world, and 2, the devil's chair located in their small cemetery. The infamous red brick bench is said to have been built by the devil himself, who returns to the chair every night at midnight. Legend has it that anyone foolish enough to sit on the chair will have evil ideas whispered in their ear until they are haunted forever by the things that they heard. Aside from the horrifying demon voices, the devil apparently loves a nice cold beer. If you leave a full can of beer unopened on the bench overnight, the next morning it will be empty but still unopened. Someone go try this. Prove it. Let's go do it. According to the Weird US website, guards are posted up there every Halloween because it's a big night for people to come and try to cause mischief in this cemetery. So we've got 2 theories here. Either they are protecting the cemetery from curious explorers, or they're protecting the explorers from the cemetery itself. Personally, I love a good haunted lighthouse story, and the old Presque Isle Lighthouse in Michigan sounds like it's haunted by really nice, friendly spirits. The original lighthouse was constructed in 1840 on a small piece of land on Lake Huron. I hope that I'm saying that right. Huron. I'm sure you'll tell me in the comments how it's pronounced. I'm sorry. For about 3 decades, this lighthouse guided ships to safety, but it unfortunately deteriorated pretty quickly, which led to another larger lighthouse being built just a couple of miles away. But this lighthouse was so loved by people that it was turned into a museum and eventually became an official historical site. There have been many caretakers over the years, but one of the most well-known was George Paris. George and his wife Lorraine lived on the property and took care of the lighthouse in the 1970s and 80s. Unfortunately, George passed away in the early 90s, but his dedication to the lighthouse ran very deep, and it's said that his ghost is still there today. One very well-known story is that of a little girl who was visiting the museum with her parents. And like they often do, this young child wandered off and was separated from her group because she was fascinated by the tall lighthouse tower. Luckily, she spoke with a nice older man who led her back to the gift shop and helped her find her parents. And when she told her parents and the tour guide about this man, the guide said that they didn't have anyone else on duty that day and showed her a photo of an old man, asking if that was the same one the little girl saw. She confidently confirmed that it was the same nice man, who was, of course, the deceased George Paris. People who visit the lighthouse claim that the old light will sometimes flicker even though it's no longer connected to an electricity source, and it's believed that George is responsible for this ghostly light. Next up, let's talk about Wyoming. Now that we're on the last part of this series, I'm realizing how weird it is that I only chose one story about a ghost ship. There was like a plethora of crybaby bridges and devil's chairs and witches' graves, but not that many ghost ships to talk about. Maybe I will dedicate a whole episode to ghost ships. That could be fun. Anyways, this ghost ship is in an unexpected place. Let's talk about the ghost ship of the Platte River in Wyoming. The first known sighting of this creepy ship was in the mid-1800s by a man named Leon Weber. Leon and his hunting dog had been out trapping for about a month when one morning he saw a dark shape looming in the distant fog. Suddenly, a very thick mist appeared, and Leon couldn't help but indulge his curiosity. Leon and his faithful dog ran toward the river, and as they got closer, his dog began whimpering and cowering behind Leon, not wanting to go any further. Leon picked up a rock and threw it at the large shape looming in front of him, and to his surprise, it bounced off of something. As Leon stood in awe, wondering what could be coming his way, the fog finally broke and he saw a huge ship floating along the riverbank. Leon was unable to move, suddenly taken over by a sense of dread as he observed the massive gray ship. It was falling apart in places and covered in a thin layer of frost. As he stood there in shock, he took notice of the crew. This ghostly crew stared blankly back at Leon. The crew slowly shuffled out of the way to reveal a coffin in the middle of the deck, and much to Leon's horror, the body in the coffin was his wife. Leon let out a scream, and the mist and the ship suddenly vanished. Leon was so spooked by what he saw that he cut his hunting trip short and headed home as quickly as he could to make sure his wife was okay. Unfortunately, when he finally made it home, there was a group of people waiting to tell him that his wife had died earlier that day. For a long time, no one believed Leon about the ship. They thought he had just made it up after the fact, but over the years, people started coming forward with more and more stories, seeing this ship and seeing their loved ones in the coffin, only for the person to pass away shortly after. This is a really interesting urban legend with so many more stories involved. I highly recommend doing a little invest Google on that one for yourself. Next up, let's visit Maine. Deep in the woods of Sabattis, Maine. Sabattis? Sabattis. Sabattis, Maine. Deep in the woods of Sabattis, Maine is an old abandoned well with a horrifying story attached to it. The story goes that one day a group of kids were exploring the woods when they found what appeared to be an abandoned farm. There wasn't much left and most of it had fallen apart, but somehow a well still stood in the middle. These kids were imaginative and adventurous, so of course they wanted to know more about this exciting find. They probably spent some time throwing rocks and twigs down the well, guessing there was a treasure at the bottom. Finally, one of the boys, the bravest of the group, decided he wanted to go to the bottom of the well and see what was hidden in the dark. It took them a little while to come up with the perfect plan, but eventually they tied an old tire to some ropes they found around the farm, and the brave boy prepared for his descent. As the other kids held onto the end of the rope and slowly lowered him into the well, his laughter eventually turned to screams, and then suddenly the screams stopped. The kids frantically pulled the rope back up the well, a task that seemed to take forever. The boy who came out of the well looked very different from the boy who went into the well. His hair had turned white, his pale blue eyes had gone dark, and his face was pale and wrinkled. Most disturbing of all, he couldn't seem to speak more than mumbled words that made no sense. Legend has it that this boy spent the rest of his days in an institution and never spoke again. I saw this story on a few different websites, and eventually I stumbled upon an article by a man named Mark LaFlame who told the story again and then admitted to being the one who started this legend in the first place. And I wanted to include this because a lot of these legends, it's all word of mouth and we don't know exactly how the legend came to be, but Mark took credit and said that this story was imagined up for a story writing contest in the late 90s for AOL. And then from there, it just grew into this pretty well-known urban legend. He said that a few times a year, still to this day, someone will stumble upon the original tale and send him an email asking for more info because they're doing research for TV shows or things like that about haunted places in Maine, and then he has to break the news to them that it was all imagined, it was a made-up story, and some people just never email him again. But he said that some people tried to demand that he tell them the true location and the identity of the boy as if he's part of some big cover-up. It's interesting, to say the least. Next on our list is Alaska. The urban legend I chose for Alaska comes from the Tlingit culture. The coastal Tlingit people are indigenous to Alaska and Canada and have history dating back at least 10,000 years. One of the most interesting legends in the Tlingit culture is the belief that some otters are actually shapeshifters called Kushtaka, who can appear as men and lure people away to trap their souls and prevent them from reincarnating. Also, again, I apologize for my pronunciation. I am sure that it is horrible, but I am trying my best. So this is very important because, from what I understand, reincarnation was a central part of the traditional Tlingit culture, so avoiding these shapeshifters is really important. The story goes that these shapeshifters would disguise themselves as otters and mimic noises that sounded like a child or a woman crying out for help. Fishermen or hunters nearby would hear that cry and wade out into the deep, freezing waters and be attacked by the Kushtaka. In some unlucky cases, people would find themselves lost in the woods or injured on a hunting trip when a helpful man would offer to assist them back home. Unfortunately, he would then lead them deeper into the woods rather than back to safety. Whether this is truth or folklore, or maybe just a great way for moms to keep their kids from wandering too far into the woods, I will definitely be looking at otters differently moving forward. Next up, let's talk about New Jersey. We simply cannot talk about New Jersey without talking about the Jersey Devil. This is probably one of the most well-known urban legends and one of my personal favorites. I remember my friend telling me about the Jersey Devil when we were like 8 years old, and I was so terrified. I remember wondering how far away New Jersey was from Utah and worried that the Jersey Devil was going to show up at my house. Anyway, The legend of the Jersey Devil has a few different backstories. The most well-known is the tale of a woman named Mary Leeds that lived with her family in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey in the 1700s. When she became pregnant with her 13th child, she was distraught, and I can't say that I blame her. She basically cursed this pregnancy, saying something along the lines of, "Let this one be the devil." Yikes. One dark and stormy night, Mary gave birth to a healthy baby boy, but after a moment, the baby sprouted wings, hooves, and horns and flew up the chimney out into the night to cause trouble for the people of New Jersey. For a while, this creature was known as the Leeds Devil, but eventually it became more popularly known as the Jersey Devil. This legend has traveled for centuries, but the most notable time frame for the Jersey Devil was in the early 1900s. For about a week in January of 1909, dozens of people reported seeing strange things in their neighborhood. It started off with weird hoof prints in their yards that looked like whatever was making them was scaling fences and wandering through multiple yards. There is an article from this time that was published in the Asbury Park Press with the headline, quote, "What mysterious tracks are these?" and blamed the tracks on the Leeds Devil. As these things do, the sightings became more and more exciting, and people said that they caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure flying past their windows. Then people started finding decomposing carcasses of animals deep in the woods, and things got so bad that people who worked in the Pine Barrens refused to go into the woods for their jobs. Everyone agreed that the creature they saw walked on two legs, had hooves, leathery wings, and the head of a goat or a horse. Imagine like a kangaroo body, but with a goat head and wings and hooves and a tail. Yikes-a-bikes. You already know what I'm going to ask. If you have spotted the Jersey Devil, or your grandpa spotted the Jersey Devil, or you have a photo of the Jersey Devil, tell me everything. We've got another iconic cryptid coming at you from West Virginia. That's right, baby. Let's talk about the Mothman. The legend of the Mothman comes from Point Place, West Virginia, and is one of the most well-known cryptids. Let me know if I have the honor of being the first person to ever tell you about the Mothman. I just feel like everyone just somehow knows about him. It's just in our brains. The very first sighting of the Mothman happened in 1966 when multiple people reported seeing an odd creature flying around Point Pleasant. Two married couples were driving along a Mason County road when something began chasing their cars. A 1966 news article described the creature as, quote, "huge and luminous, feathery and fuzzy, brownish gray and grayish brown, moth-like and bird-like, and it has large reflector-like eyes that shine in the dark," end quote. One of the women who saw the Mothman described it as looking like a slender, muscular man, about 7 feet tall, with white wings, and said that she was unable to discern his face due to the hypnotic effect of his eyes. The Mothman's hot, you guys. In the decades since this first sighting, there have been dozens of sightings of the Mothman, and sometimes these sightings coincide with horrible, tragic events. This has caused some people to believe that the Mothman is causing these disasters, but other people think he is trying to warn them about disasters. It's kind of up to you to decide if he's a villain or a hero. In 2016, a man got a few pictures of what is believed to be the Mothman. He was new to the area and had never heard of the Mothman legend before he saw what he did. This man said he was driving along Route 2 when he saw something huge jumping between the trees. He did what anyone would and pulled over to get a couple of pictures. The pictures are not great quality, but I will give him this. If they are not doctored, you've seen pictures where people zoom in to something and everything kind of looks grainy and weird, especially in 2016. Our phones weren't that nice. But they show what looks like a person with wings flying around in the trees. The photos are dark, like I said, and you can only see the silhouette of whatever it is. This man promises that the photos were not photoshopped or doctored in any way. And some people absolutely believe it's the Mothman, while one scientific writer, Sharon A. Hill, said it's more likely, quote, a bird, perhaps an owl, carrying a frog or snake away, and she also wrote that, quote, there is no reason to suspect it is the Mothman as described in the legend. There are too many far more reasonable explanations, end quote. Are there? Okay, I'm not saying it's for sure the Mothman, but I don't think you can say there's zero reason to believe that. If we are going off of the picture alone, and she doesn't think it's a fake photo, okay, she didn't say it's a fake photo of a pretend Mothman. She thinks it's a real photo. You can't say that it absolutely looks like a bird carrying a snake. Am I a Mothman believer? Am I a Mothman stan? Yes. We've got one last haunted road for this urban legend series, and that is Paradise Road near Jefferson, Wisconsin. I read a really interesting post on thebozo.com that described Paradise Road, quote, like any other Midwestern country road, 2 lanes under a tunnel of trees, but once the sun goes down, Paradise is a whole different beast. This road is full of tons of creepy stories. We've got all of the usual haunted road hijinks, super dark, no streetlights, only the moon and your headlights to guide your way, and that automatically gives you the creeps and makes you see things that maybe aren't there. But there are also stories of Paradise Road where people will get out of their cars to do a little exploring, and they will hear footsteps following them, but then see that there's no one else around. There are disembodied screams that come from the trees, and there are also stories of people being followed by a car, and in their panic, they'll run further into the trees. They'll hear people get out of the car and start coming toward them, but then after a while, everything will be silent again. Once they calm down enough, they head back toward the road, only to find that the car is nowhere to be seen and that there are no tracks in the dirt. Very spooky. There are lots of theories as to why this road is so spooky and potentially haunted, but it seems like the most popular theory is that long ago, 3 sisters lived in an old house on this road. They were accused of witchcraft and hung from trees on their property, and since then, there has been a dreadful presence over the area. And our very last stop for the series, but certainly not the least exciting, South Dakota. The story of Easton Castle in Aberdeen, South Dakota is such a fun one because it's got all of the classic urban legend things. Basically, there's a big Queen Anne style mansion that was built around 1890, and as it often goes with these old mansions, people know a tiny piece of the history and then they just fill in the rest of the story with their own town gossip and speculation, which is how all good legends are born. Easton Castle was originally built as a wooden house, but it was eventually covered over with yellow bricks, earning it the nickname the Yellow Brick House. The legend goes that the housekeeper in the early 1900s was a girl named Matilda Jewel Gage, who was Frank L. Baum's niece. Frank L. Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz, and some people believe that Matilda was the inspiration for Dorothy. Also, it's fair to note that some people say that this girl's name was Leslie Gage, and other people say that her name was Matilda Gage. Not 100% sure. Either way, it's speculated that she was the inspiration for Dorothy. Allegedly, Baum spent time at the house and was so inspired by the architecture that he modeled Oz after this castle. Rumor has it that Matilda haunts the 3rd story of Easton Castle and has been spotted throughout the house. Old whispered town gossip says that the original owner's son went mad and locked himself up in the home after his parents died. For a time, the house and grounds became unkempt, which only fueled the creepiness and gossip around it. Rumors of disembodied voices, ghostly apparitions, creaky stairs, and even a knife-wielding psycho spirit are just some of the tales told about Easton Castle. A quick Investigoogle will absolutely squash most of these theories, and the current owners say that there's nothing haunted about it. But the whole point of this Urban Legends series and why urban legends are so fun is exactly that. The rumors and gossip and ridiculous stories that come from a kernel of truth and live on in wild tales, no matter what the real story is what makes it so fun. I hope that you have enjoyed this very long 4-part series. Don't forget, all 3 of the previous parts are linked in the description box or show notes if you missed any of them and want to go back. Let me know what your very favorite urban legend was, and send me your personal hometown urban legends, or if you have a story kind of talking about one of the ones I've already done, send those to tgicrimeday@gmail.com or any of your other spooky tales. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support. Make sure you check out the Bride Again Foundation and the Bexley necklaces. Like I said before, everything you need is linked in the description box or the show notes, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.